I'm Sarah. Oh, I got a bit of feedback there. I'm the chair of the NextGen Committee in Scotland. We've got Hannah, who is one of the vice chairs. And I think I saw Wilma came on here as well, who a lot of you will probably know as the coordinator for Scotland. So yeah, thank you so much for coming to this. We're really pleased today to have Camryn Anderson, who is Senior Consultant and Marketing Communication Specialist at Hayes. And we've also got Cathy Donald and Emma Reid, who are employment law solicitors from Bellwether Green. So we're really excited to have them. I think the reason the team decided to have this event was that we know how difficult a time COVID-19 and lockdown has been for everyone. I think obviously your career is something that's really important to you. You go to work every day, well, every weekday. So the uncertainties that it's caused around career paths and just the isolation. Oh, yeah, well, I'm saying, if your microphone's on, could you turn it off just for now? So I'm getting some feedback. Cool. So yeah, we were just feeling that it'd be good to get an event that could really give people a bit of idea how the job market is looking and what you can do to, I guess, make yourself stand out if you are looking for a job. And there's obviously been people in the industry who have been on furlough. I'm still getting some feedback. Is everyone's microphone off? So we have Cathy and Emma here to talk to us a bit about from the employment law side of things as well, which I guess people beyond the PR industry will have to deal with as well. So we just think it's a really useful event for people to come along to. So we're really pleased to see you here. So we've got people that we familiar faces and some new faces as well, which is brilliant. So Camryn is going to start, and she's got her screen shared. So if everyone can see the screen, if you can't see it, just put in the chat box that you can't see it, and we'll try and get that fixed. But I can see it, everyone should be able to. And just a reminder, if you didn't hear me at the start, we are recording this, so if you want to keep your camera off, you're welcome to, but you're also welcome to keep it on as well. So I will pass over to Camryn.
Hello. I actually think the feedback might be coming from me. I hope not. So I have just moved house. There's not much in my living room right now, but it's the only place I get signal. So if there's feedback from me, just tell me and I'll turn the volume down just in case. So I'm honoured to speak today. Obviously it's been a challenging time for many people over the last few months, and there's been a lot of trends that we've been able to identify from a Scottish perspective and a UK perspective over the last few months. So I can see a few people that I recognise already. So for those of you who don't know me, I recruit in marketing and communications in Scotland, predominantly the contracts market, but I do have quite a hand in the permanent sector as well, just from a team perspective and candidate knowledge, etc. And I've been with the business for about 2.5 years now, so it does change quite a lot, and it has done over the last few years when you try to identify trends. It's definitely an emerging specialism, and many people and skills are changing across the years. So I'll just flick through some slides today to hope to help anyone's careers moving forward, and give you an overview of what I've been finding in the last few months as well. So I'll cover what my view of the PR and comms market is just now, and what I think it probably will be in the next few months. I'll also provide some advice on job searching or people wanting to advance in their career path, and also advice for students or graduates who have just entered the job market as well, because I appreciate it's a bit of a daunting time for anybody at any level just now. So I'll start with PR and communications. This is my opinion. So this is just, I do speak to candidates and clients on a daily basis, so people can obviously agree and disagree, but this is just from a perspective of speaking to people constantly. So all through lockdown, comms has been appreciated more from a business perspective, whereas before it wasn't necessarily the case. It was usually the first team to go, and people didn't understand the need for comms. now, because we're in such a crisis, there has been a need for internal communications, crisis communications, change communications and stakeholder engagement. So businesses have started to appreciate more around what comms people do and being able to identify that as an essential area of the business. So you don't want to think about positives to come out of COVID, but and you've got to put a positive spin on things, but that's what I've found over the last few months. My personal thoughts are that PR and comms is a busy area for a number of reasons. So touching on internal comms professionals, they will continue to communicate to a variety of initiatives, and that's anything from wellbeing policies to marketing or operations updates, and just looking at how they can streamline these comms, making them impactful and effective for employees receiving them. So they will have to manage that a bit more strategically moving forward, depending on how businesses look to return to work or look to what the new era of work will look like. Content's been quite busy for me, especially in lockdown. A lot of businesses have been asking for content designers or copywriters to support them with quick projects that they need to get over the line that was not needed a full-time member of staff for. So these people will write new pieces of content continuously just to make sure the messages are on point and that they're accurate in this ever-changing world. PR might not be as busy, and I say that because it doesn't feel as busy right now because internal comms and external comms seems to be the way forward. But if the content side is there, then the PR will be as well. But if that, my opinion around that is when it's in-house, it will be looked upon as more of a busy area in comparison to if it's not in-house. Public sector businesses have been the most businesses to recruit in lockdown. Again, from my personal experience, I've still recruited for education, which I didn't think would be the case. NHS, Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, some charities have still been recruiting. The odd private sector that have recruited is more in food and beverage, which you'll think from a key worker perspective is correct. And then some financial services companies as well, because they were already set up to work from home, whereas not other businesses were. And Hayes are actually currently investing in our comms and PR team as well. So hopefully that'll show you that if we're a big business investing into our PR and comms, that most other businesses are looking to do the same as well. So that's my view. Hopefully people agree. This is just some coverage that Hayes have done from a PR perspective. Well, it says July there, but it's just to show you that we are investing in our PR and our comms, and then it can be done elsewhere. So it's not to say there's negativity around PR, it's just there is quite a lot going on in the industry, so just supporting the external comms perspective there. Advice for job searching. So there's a lot of advice for job searching. I could do an hour presentation alone on this. So I've included some slides at the end that I would advise people look at as a hub perspective. So if you look at the hub, there's several things to click into to help you support CV writing or video interviewing techniques, or what's the best video tool to use when you're interviewing. So I won't touch into that just now because we're limited for time. But just now people might feel there's a lot of applications going into jobs, or they're against a lot of competitors. So my advice to that would be is be open-minded when you're job hunting. You might have to compromise on some skills or some career aspirations, but it's not going to be your last job. It might have to be a linear approach for now, but just because there's a lot of applications doesn't mean you don't have a chance. And hopefully these tips will help you edit your applications to make sure that you do have that chance. LinkedIn has been a great tool for candidates to use in lockdown. Most hiring managers and recruiters are on there. So if your personal brand is on there, make sure it says that you're open to work. Make sure you've got a reflective CV, your pictures decent. I've seen a few pictures recently that a bit odd. But just make sure you've got a professional picture, you're open to work, you've got your CV on there, and that you're regularly posting content that's about our industry, because people are more engaging that way. I always suggest to tailor your applications. So a lot of people will have generalist comms CVs, which is okay. But if it's an internal comms application on a specific project, make sure your CV's been quite project driven or highlighted the projects that you've worked on. It can be challenging if you've just got a generic CV to then pick you from the pack to go for that job. So that's why I would always say make sure your applications are tailored to a job description. If it's not through a recruiter, some companies will do CV search names. So if you've not got the word internal comms on your CV, but it's an internal comms job you're applying for, you'll automatically not be in the process if a company is using like algorithm searches. So yeah, just be aware of that one. Be clear about what your USP is. So for your USP, there's questions that you can always ask yourself: is how am I going to be the candidate for the job compared to someone else? You know, ways that you can get edge over another candidate. So you really need to be clear about how are you going to be better compared to another candidate. So always think about answers of what can I do better, or how can I have a better way of wording things on my CV. I also say agile working does require agile thinking, and as silly as it may sound in lockdown, we do have to adapt to the way of working is right now. It might sound like common sense, but if someone's asking you to go in for an interview and you don't really want to go in for an interview, you want to do it virtually or you want to do it different ways, then just show your flexibility and show the agile way of working by doing it that way, rather than saying, I'm just not going in because of COVID. There's other ways to word things to make sure that it comes across a bit more agile. And then I'd say reflect on what you want from your career. I think a lot of people have been reflecting in lockdown as to what they want. Some people have less permanent roles and they now want to be in contracting, or vice versa. Some people are in a contract role, want to be in permanent, or they want to be part-time to have more time with their kids, or they want reduced hours to have bath time with their kids. There's been a lot of conversations I've been having in lockdown where candidates are reflecting on what they want. So yeah, just make sure you've got a list of things that you're like, this is my top 1 or 2 things that I want from my career, and then the rest could maybe slip a little bit, should it be a role that you're considering. Also, your softer hidden skills always come through on your CV anyway, but I just make sure they're on there. And then, as I mentioned, there's a hub at the end of this presentation I'd recommend you look at for video interview tips, just to make sure that you've had a look at the ways best to present yourself on a video, because not many have taken place in person yet for myself. CVs, I appreciate I spoke quite a lot on that one point there, so I'll try and rattle through the CV section. A lot of CVs I'm receiving don't have a personal statement on them, which doesn't make me not want to call somebody, but it makes me highlight why have you just went into your employment history and not sold yourself to me. So a good 100 to 150 words is saying, I'm an external comms professional, this is where my key areas lie, X amount of years experience, this is what I'm looking for next. It's a quick, short, snappy statement that'll grab someone's attention, rather than, you know, education listed down and in your employment history. It's good just to grab someone's attention that way. I always say bring your achievements to life using action verbs. So action verbs are something that, instead of saying I achieved this or I done this, it's more about I surpassed this, or we over exceeded our target, something like that, to make it sound bigger and better, even though it might not have felt that way. But it is good to use different words instead of I just achieved this. You can use bigger words that will help make a client look at your CV and think, this is what we want to bring into our team. Definitely add links to work that you've got or blogs that you've wrote, any internal comms that you can share with businesses. They seem to go down a treat, or newsletters that you've got examples of. No errors, please. Comms people don't usually have errors, but sometimes they do. So it's always good just to make sure there's no errors on your CV, just to give you the best chance. I'd always say avoid cliches and overused phrases, such as results driven. I see it on most CVs, but just to keep it as succinct as possible, but to the point. And like I said before, just make sure your CV's got the key points from a job description in your CV if you're applying to that certain job, so that the clients can choose you for an interview, essentially. That's my quick tips there. I don't know if we're stopping for questions now, we're at the end, so I'll just keep rattling through it and then people can contact me about questions moving forward. So advice for students. So I'll be honest, I've been contacted by quite a lot of students in lockdown or graduates. I've had quite a lot of conversations with many candidates actually, and even before lockdown, what I look for in a graduate CV is internship experience or some form of experience, even if it's they worked in their local cafe and they've done their social media, or they were part of the hockey club and they've done some marketing for them, anything that will make it look like you've done something whilst doing your degree. So yeah, I've had to do some research into this as well, because I found some new areas to support students and graduates with, which hopefully will help you out today. So the newest bit that I found is businesses are offering virtual internships and work placements online. I'm not sure if anyone has had any success or looked into this themselves, but there's a few businesses in Scotland and across the UK that are doing virtual internships and work placements, which they aren't always paid, but it will give you some form of work to do, just so some businesses are not looking to recruit as much right now. So definitely, if you're struggling, have a look at those, or I can send you some links through that I come across when I was doing some research into this the last couple of days. Networking, so like I said about LinkedIn, make sure you're connected with the right people, connect with groups, talk to clients in the industry. Like today we're doing a virtual event, I think it's great if you've joined this today to sort of bounce ideas off of each other or off of us. It just means that you're being proactive, you're showing that you want to learn, you're showing that you want to work, and that you want to hear what's going on in the market so that you know the trends. I have put on here, take care of yourself. Quite a lot of graduates are stressed, or students are stressed, and I would actually add this into your job search so that you're viewing self-care as part of your job search. It's very easy to get stressed and worried about your work. Just make sure that you're putting yourself first as well, and getting as much support as possible. So if that's speaking to myself or someone else in the industry that I can get you in touch with, then hopefully we can do that, because I do present at most of the universities anyway in Scotland. So there might be people in there that know something else, or we could connect you with, just to give you some extra experience. Just whilst we've been in lockdown, obviously there's a lot of local businesses that have needed help. I've actually been ordering fruit baskets and vegetable baskets from our local businesses, and I know that they've had quite a lot of people come in to do social media or to help promote their business on Instagram. So I'd probably advise, if they're still doing things like that now, to connect with them as well. And these are areas really to look at yourself. I've just included them here so that you've got them there, but this is the hubs that I'm talking about. So we launched our hubs at the start of lockdown for candidates and clients to look at. So it's all about practical methods of job hunting today for the future of work. So you can look at interview tips, how to be agile, how to manage your well-being from home, how to manage your team from home. Just depends where you fall in that spectrum. But I've included some links here where to look at on the website and what's coming up next, just to look at. So I'll leave that with you, and I can send the presentation around for after, and so we'll go into all of them. That's another presentation for another day. And then that's my short presentation for everybody today.
That's great. Thanks, Camryn. If anyone has any questions now, you're welcome to ask them, or we can save them for the end. You can also, if a question just comes to you, you can also just stick it in the group chat as well, and we can look at them later. Great. So yeah, so next up, we'll stop sharing.
There you go.
Emma and Cathy are, I think we're not going to have slides for this one. This is going to be a bit more of a relaxed discussion. So I think Cathy and Emma are quite happy to take questions during their chat as well. So yeah, I'm just put it over to them.
Okay, hi everybody, I'm Emma, and in my screen Cathy's just down there, but I suspect it's not the same for everybody else. I'll tell you a little bit about us, and as Sarah said, actually, you know, we're quite used to people phoning us up and asking us questions, and probably that's when we're best. If somebody has a particular issue, you know, we can do our best to answer that. So I'd really encourage you to just please pop something in the chat box, or you know, switch your video on or whatever and say hello and ask a question. I don't mind being interrupted. Cathy and I are both interrupters. We do it to each other all the time. We're very comfortable with it. So please just let me know any questions if you have, because I think it'll be more productive if you have questions about your particular circumstances as we go along, and then we can be most helpful to you. So Cathy and I are both employment law solicitors. We've been doing employment law together for quite some time. We've actually also worked from home and very flexibly for quite some time. So we were very fortunate when lockdown happened, because we just had to pack a few things in a box and away we went. And you know, we've always worked pretty flexibly, which has been super. I have to say, it's not been somebody else telling me I have to work from home, which is obviously the situation we have now, is sort of imposed home working, which is slightly different. But I think it's safe to say that Cathy and I are both fairly experienced at working from home, and the ups and downs of that as well. So I thought it would be helpful just to tell you a little bit about the sort of work we're getting at the moment, who it is that's phoning us up and asking us questions, and we'll also just start chatting with you a little bit about the main things that are going on just now. So obviously furlough, a little bit about redundancy and other impacts that COVID has had on working life, and I'll talk a wee bit about home working and returning to work as well. But please do stop us or ask a question if you'd like to, or if anything comes up whilst we're talking. The sorts of work that Cathy and I do, it's very, very varied. It can be anything from grievances, discrimination claims, dismissals, redundancy, really anything that goes on in the workplace, you name it. We've had a phone call about it pretty much. At the moment, the vast majority of work, and this is quite grim, but the vast majority of work we're doing is about redundancies, both for employers and employees. That's the reality of what's happening out there at the moment. I don't think that will come as a surprise to anybody, because you know, it's all over the headlines. That's what's happening. It's happening in industries where you wouldn't anticipate it happening. You know, companies big and small, and there's a huge variety of ways that people are dealing with it. But yes, so redundancy is a big area of work for us at the moment. We're also kept pretty busy with queries about furlough. Furlough was, like employment law, turbocharged to the extreme when all of that was coming out, and the various announcements and the guidelines. It was brand new in terms of the scheme, but I think what people perhaps didn't realise at the time, and I mean businesses and employees when I say this, they perhaps didn't think of all the impact that it would have on other areas of employment law. So other areas of employment law continued as normal, so people were still protected from discrimination, people were on maternity leave and had protections around that, people have annual leave entitlements, all of that. And so as we went through the past few weeks, it all sort of started to unfold a bit, and we learned a wee bit more about how those things intertwined with each other. So we've been doing a lot of advice around furlough and chiefly around redundancy at the moment. And Wilma's asking, do we think that furlough will have a significant impact on redundancies? And well, I think that is what's happening now, is that companies are planning ahead for the sort of winding down of furlough. Big companies have to plan further ahead than smaller companies where they're making more redundancies, and that is the reason why we're quite busy at the moment, because we see things that are maybe a month and a half out from redundancies actually taking effect. So yeah, for sure, I think the end of furlough will probably continue to have an effect, and unfortunately the effect will be that redundancies are going to be, I think, headline news for the next few months, sadly. I'm going to let Cathy talk a wee bit about furlough and furlough contracts and things, and then, because I see that Wilma's also asking, should employees have a furlough contract? So I'm going to hand over to Cathy, and then Cathy will probably hand the baton back to me, and I'll talk a wee bit about home working and returning to work from home.
Thanks. Can you hear me? Is that all okay? Grand. Yeah, so Wilma had put up a few queries about the furlough scheme. I don't know, I'm not quite sure of the breakdown of who is on the call in terms of the breakdown of employers or employees. For employees and employers who are on it, some of you may already have been furloughed or may have employees on furlough. The scheme was introduced in March, just I think before the lockdown announcement, and obviously aimed at avoiding the kind of mass redundancies that would result from the restrictions kind of resulting from the lockdown. So under the scheme, in essence, employers are reimbursed for presently 80% of the employee's wages, up to a maximum of £2,500 a month. Employers can choose to top up furlough pay to 100%, but don't have to. And during furlough, employees can't do any work at all for the employer while they're on furlough. I'll come to part-time furlough in a minute. Interestingly, employees can work elsewhere, provided their contract of employment would allow them to do so. In terms of, do you have to have a furlough contract? I think it would probably be unwise of employers not to do that, particularly if they are paying their employees just 80% of pay, because that in essence is a reduction in pay. It's contrary to their contract of employment, so you'd have a breach of contract claim if you're not topping up and if you're suddenly reducing your employees' pay. That said, for most employees, they're probably not going to object to that. It's probably more attractive than the option of redundancy, which might be the alternative, or being asked to take unpaid leave, which some employers did initially before it was clear that furlough was a possibility. As Emma said, it was all a bit fast and furious with furlough because it came in, there was really very little guidance. We were getting calls from people and responding as best we could in the absence of guidance on some of the more particular points. There's been quite a bit of change to the scheme since, quite a bit of movement, and notably it was extended initially in one additional month, and then in June I think extended to the end of October, so quite a long furlough period. However, you couldn't add any employees to the furlough scheme after the 10th of June. So if you hadn't already been on furlough at that point, that was it, the opportunity was lost. There was a question about whether the end of furlough is going to have impact on redundancies, and as Emma said, yes, it probably is, it definitely is. And that we're starting to feel that now, because from this month, the scheme is no longer cost neutral for employers, because from this month employers have to contribute the national insurance contribution and the pension contribution, which they didn't have to do before. Next month the furlough contribution reduces by 10%, and in October reduces by a further 10%. So employers are only being reimbursed 60% of pay, but have to continue to pay at least 80%. So there starts to be a cost for employers, which I think is why we're definitely getting more calls about redundancy now. The other, I suppose, significant change to the furlough scheme is that they introduced part-time furlough, which I think was really positive. because there were lots of employers saying, well, you know, I have some work, I just don't have as much work. And initially it was an all or nothing scheme, but with part-time furlough, it means you can bring an employee back for maybe, you know, 2 days of the week and keep them on furlough for the 3 days. 3 days they remain paid at 80%, full pay for the 2 days. And that I think has been helpful in avoiding redundancies. It allows the employers a bit of a halfway house to kind of test the water a little bit, see how the business is looking, and hopefully, you know, is a move towards a gradual return to normal work for employees. So yeah, as I said, the scheme was aimed at avoiding redundancies. It's definitely done that this far, but as Emma said, you know, we see redundancies maybe a bit further out, and there's definitely redundancies coming. The other thing is that a lot of the larger employers are doing things as potential alternatives to redundancy, things in changes such as asking employees to reduce hours, asking employees to take pay cuts. And in some ways, you know, that's not maybe unexpected or unattractive for employees, because people have gotten a bit used to working less or to working not at all if fully furloughed. They're used to being paid less maybe if they've been on 80%. And definitely people are changing their view, I think, of work and what work should or could look like. So that might not be unattractive to people. The flip side is, even if it's not attractive, the alternatives may not be great, and the alternatives may look like redundancy. The other issue is that employers, if they want to take a really aggressive approach about this, could elect to dismiss people with an offer to re-engage them. It's quite an aggressive move, but essentially it minimises their risk of an unfair dismissal claim. And for lots of people, if your option is to take reduced terms, especially in these circumstances when jobs may be hard to come by, or to be unemployed, you may just live with the reduced terms. Not ideal, but there we are. If an employer has to make redundancies, there's certain requirements they have to go through. As Emma said, that's part of the reason why we see things a bit further out, because for larger organisations where at least 20 people are going, there's collective consultation obligations, there's minimum time frames for that, at least 30 days for consultation. If it's a smaller organisation with just maybe a couple of people going to go, really you're just talking about individual consultation. There's no minimum time period that has to last. An employer's obligations in that are fairly standard, as you might expect. They have to inform employees about it. They have to consult with employees about the prospective redundancies. They have to select fairly, and they have to look at alternatives to redundancy. So if you're in a job, if you're told you're at risk of redundancy, there should be a consultation, and that is your opportunity, I suppose, to make representations, to proactively maybe suggest ways in which redundancies could be avoided, worth thinking about. If your role is confirmed as redundant, your employer should be looking at possible alternative roles, both within your company and within any associated group companies. And that's something employers should be doing anyway. I was going to speak to you a little bit about entitlements on redundancy. To be honest, you can Google that and find out what entitlements are. Essentially, unless you have 2 years service, you're pretty vulnerable. You need a minimum of 2 years service, both for redundancy payment and for an unfair dismissal claim. So that's your starting point really, is do you have 2 years service? The statutory redundancy entitlement is not that exciting, to be honest. Essentially 1 week's pay per year of service usually, but capped at £538 per week in terms of the week's pay. So nobody's going to be retiring on a statutory redundancy payment, but some employers will have an enhanced scheme which may be more attractive. So yeah, I think redundancy, obviously a very real fear for people at this time. We get that. Having said that, I think COVID has brought some opportunities, some changes to employment which are positive and which will hopefully remain once COVID has passed. And that seems to be the feeling I think we get. There's employers who are talking about not requiring people to come back to work in the office full time in the near future, in the medium future, some even saying we may never require employees to be full time in the office again. So there's definitely, I think Emma and I we both have been working parents. We have always embraced flexible working. We've always wanted to work flexibly, and COVID in a way has kind of pushed that through at a pace that nobody ever anticipated. So there are opportunities. There's opportunities for more flexible working. There's better opportunities maybe to balance home life and work life. And Emma's going to maybe have a bit of discussion around the advantages and also the potential pitfalls of those changes.
Just before I do, I was going to pick up on a couple of the questions because I think they link into some of the things you've said. So Sarah was saying, is there a limit on how much employers can reduce employee wages by? And before this call, I was having a look actually on the PRCA website. There's data there about pay cuts, redundancies, furloughing, and I thought this was quite interesting. And the respondents to that survey had, or one of the questions was, what percentage did you cut your staff salary by? And 63% of people that responded had said between 10 to 25%. Anything more than that was quite a lot lower. So 6% over a 25% pay cut and 31% less than 10% pay cut. So it seems that it's not unusual where there's a pay cut being required that has fallen between sort of 10 to 25%. But the short answer to Sarah's question is no, there is no limit to how much employers can cut wages by, but it has to be with the employees' agreement. The problem is for everybody just now, you don't have a great bargaining position in certain industries or in certain businesses, depending on how they've weathered the storm. So and people are obviously much more keen to stay in employment than lose their jobs and are willing to do things they wouldn't have done before. So no limit to how much can be cut, but it does need to be done in agreement. A couple of tips on that front. I think if you are agreeing a pay cut, and I appreciate people may have done this already, so this might be a bit late in the day, but you probably want to try and negotiate that as a temporary pay cut. Make sure everything's in writing so that you can be clear about what you've agreed. And if the worst was to happen and you were made redundant, you probably want to build something into that agreement that says it's not going to affect your redundancy entitlements, so that your notice pay and redundancy pay would still be on your full salary entitlement. If you can negotiate that, that would probably be a helpful safeguard to have. And then just having a quick look through the questions. Fraser's asking about what can I do to make my job as safe as possible. Cathy's hinted on that as well. I think, unfortunately, having your bum in the seat is probably the most protection you can get. So if you really, everybody, even in normal circumstances, is vulnerable in the first 2 years of employment, because your employer can end your employment and you can't claim unfair dismissal. So short of that, if you can negotiate a good notice entitlement, that helps. That's probably the best thing you can do, so that you know that they have to give you a certain amount of notice before you leave, and not just a minimum notice. That's probably good if you can do that. And this is maybe not something you can negotiate with an employer, but some employers might have a redundancy policy or provision on redundancy. It's not really what you want to be going in and asking in your job interview, what do you pay on redundancy? But you may hear on the grapevine of employers who are particularly good at looking after their staff and in all situations, including redundancy. That's probably the best you can do. I see Fiona, I think it's Fiona, is asking a question as well. If salary is reduced by up to 40%, does a new contract of employment? Well, if you're varying any terms of employment contract, and that includes salary, you should really do that in writing. You don't need to do a full new contract. I don't think there's anything that says as soon as your salary cut is of a particular level, you need a full new contract. I mean, I think you can vary anything in an employment contract and do it by writing. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question. I was going to do a very quick chat about home working, very quick. So I'll do that. I I think it will be really interesting to see if this brings changes to the law. Before now, if anybody wanted to work flexibly, you could request it, but there wasn't a whole lot you could do to push it through if your employer wasn't keen. And we always used to say to people in the olden days before COVID, if you want to put a little pressure on your employer to really engage with you about flexible working or working from home, ask them for a trial, because then one of two things is going to happen. Either it's going to work well, great, well then they have to really listen to you and hopefully give you what you're asking for, or two, it might not work. There may be reasons for that. You can address them, hopefully sort them out and still get what you want. So now we're all in the situation where we've worked from home. So it's going to be much more difficult for employers to say, no, it's not going to work. No, here's our reasons why it's not going to work, because most people have quite a good answer to that now. So it'll be really interesting to see whether the law sort of supports people a bit more about home working and flexible working. As an employee, if you're working from home, it might surprise you to know your employer still has responsibilities for your health and safety. So if you're an employer, that is definitely something to think about. You want your home working policy in place, ideally. I mean, I'm a great believer in having things on paper so that everybody knows where they stand. So that would be a good thing if you were an employer. Equally, if you're an employer and your business doesn't have a home working policy, you feel you need to ask them questions about how it's going to work. If you have particular health problems, let's say mobility problems or a disability, your employer still have obligations to consider that, and they still have legal obligations about making adjustments. So that's worth bearing in mind as well. Employers, of course, employers should be doing what's right by their employees, keeping in contact, having greater understanding about the door opening, as it does quite often when I'm on a Zoom call behind me and a little person walks in, that sort of thing. I think everybody probably is a bit more relaxed about that, which is really nice to see, because the boundary between personal life and working life is just much, much thinner now. And I think what we might start to see happening is, because this is looking like being a longish term arrangement, we might start seeing people applying a bit of structure to home working, because really it was an emergency situation where we all ended up working from home. But now employers are probably thinking about things like managing performance, managing teams, how do we keep track of people, formalising things, making it all a wee bit more routine and structured. So I think we'll probably see that. I see that somebody's asking about return to work, so I was going to touch on that as well. I think there probably would be lots of personal questions around this, and personal circumstances obviously really affect how you feel about this. I mean, if you're working in a big office, an open plan office, it has its challenges. If you have to get public transport to your office, that has its challenges. If you have a health condition that makes you particularly vulnerable, obviously you will have anxiety around a return and the risk to you of that. So at the moment, we're all meant to be working from home if we can, and at the moment employers are meant to be accommodating about that. So I think the best thing you can do is have a discussion with your employer. If you're worried about it, tell them why, and see if there's something that could be done. I think now is the time when employers are probably about as flexible as they will ever be. So if you want to talk about different start times, different finish times, so you're not getting on a busy bus, requesting a car parking space, letting them know about health conditions or things that are causing you particular difficulty. I think now is the time to do it, because you're probably more likely to get a sympathetic ear. It's quite difficult to give general advice about returning to an office, because there is so much sort of scope for a variation between people's working arrangements. I think the thing to do is really to seek flexibility from your employer. Even if you can't do all of your job at home, perhaps they will build in the ability to do some of it from home, which reduces, I suppose, the risk of everybody to a certain extent, and that's ultimately what we're all trying to do. And I think the other difficult thing with returning to work is that we just don't know what's around the corner. Things might change. We might end up either locally probably possibly not nationally again, but locally, having to work from home without going into an office again. So there is probably going to be a bit of flux around the whole thing. That's all I have to say really about returning to work. But I do think it is something which is quite personal, turns on your personal circumstances. If you do have questions about particular aspects of that, please just shout to Cathy or I.
Brilliant. I think that was great, and I think we can open now if we've got any more questions, either for Cathy and Emma or for Camryn. So if you want, the questions can mix in between, whether or not they're more from the employment law side or whether or not they're from the recruitment job searching side. If people don't have any questions, I can always start us off. Get people's.
I see Wilma's mentioned about if you feel it's not safe to return, you have to. That is a question that we were asked actually quite a lot, and also in the context of people who were pregnant just before lockdown came in to the full extent, because they were vulnerable, and a lot of employers were still requiring pregnant ladies to go into work. There is health and safety legislation about unsafe working places, but I'm not sure how helpful it is to employees really. It sort of depends on why you feel unsafe, and I suppose whether that's something you're saying the employer's not doing well enough, whether maybe it's because you've got a particular health condition, or just the type of job that you do might be higher risk. So I think that unfortunately that's a question that can only really be answered by it depends. Unless Cathy, do you have a different view on that? Or
no, I think you're right. I think it's all going to be so personal, to people's circumstances.
You said that now's the best time to ask employers for something if you feel that either working from home or going back to work. What is the best way that you'd recommend for people to do that? Should they approach their employer for an informal chat or a Zoom, I guess, if they're from home, or should it be in writing? What would you say is the best way to start those discussions?
I think it depends on how communication normally works in the organisation. If you've an easy relationship with your line manager, then just have the conversation in a natural way. If it feels better to drop an email, that's fine. I think it's harder in a way. I quite often like picking up the phone to people because you can manage your tone, and you can, if it feels like it's not going that well, you can pull away a little bit. Whereas in an email, sometimes it's hard to put a smiley face on it. So I suppose I'm a fan of face to face or Zoom to Zoom contact, so that you can gauge how it's going.
Great. I think there's another question from Wilma. If your employer wants to pivot your role into another area, would you require a new contract?
Are you meaning, I'm not sure if you mean kind of a location or a type of work? I'm assuming type of work.
Yeah, type of work.
Again, I think it really depends. I mean, quite often we're working on something and somebody has worked in an organisation for 30 years and they still have a 30-year-old contract. It doesn't in any way reflect their current job. It doesn't reflect their job title, their pay, their holiday entitlement. It doesn't mean there isn't a contract, because the contract is as it operates just now. So your pay is what you get just now. And even if it says something different in your contract, if you've been getting paid 30 grand for the past year, your employer can suddenly drop that back to 20 on the grounds that that's what it says in your very old contract. So, there is always a contract. The only reason why you want a contract to be in writing is to evidence it, and that's normally around kind of the finer details of it, because the big things like where you work, how many hours you work, what you get paid is clear to everybody, I think. So it just depends. If it's a different type of work, I think you could cover that. You could cover that with a letter. You could cover it just by virtue of the fact that your role gradually changes. If you're more comfortable with having it in writing, I think that's fine as well.
Yeah, if it's a completely new area, you might want to say to them, again, you might want to do it on a trial basis. That's all. I love a trial. It's always a handy thing to have up your sleeve as a suggestion. If it's something you're a wee bit unsure about, and we do occasionally get people who have had that happen to them, and then it becomes clearer further down the line, oh, actually I'm not getting so much client contact, or I'm not getting involved with this particularly big client, exciting client that was involved in, or I might worry that it affects my career prospects. Sometimes these things unfold over a bit of time. So if, it's good if you're willing to show that you're up to trying something different. I think we all have to be a bit more creative and flexible at this time. But if you're feeling a little unsure about it, you could always say, I'm up for trying it. Could we just do it on a I'm just trying it basis and see how it goes? And if it turns out not to be what we think it's going to be, or not suitable for some reason, then can I revert back to my original role? Great.
And Camryn, I guess linking to that, if people are feeling that they need to maybe look into an area that is something you mentioned that internal comms is becoming so much more important, and a lot of our members work in external comms. What are the opportunities in terms of moving to that, and how transferable are the skills?
I think the skills from external to internal comms, they're there, but it will be a culture shock, essentially. People will have a big network and external comms of people to speak to. Internal comms is a different kettle of fish in terms of analysing your workforce, having a strategy for your employees. So it's not for everybody, and it's not as enjoyable as the external comms. From actually a conversation I had today, someone told me they much prefer external comms to internal. I do think roles are becoming more generalist, where they include both internal and external. So I do think there will be a balance between both if you wanted to look at both, rather than having a full internal or a full external role. That clients are looking to incorporate more generalist roles, and hopefully the salaries will reflect that, because there's been some positions that they don't, but we do obviously have to communicate that to the clients as well.
Do we have any other questions?
I have a question for Hannah. Where did you get your wallpaper from? That is gorgeous.
Thank you so much. I've just decorated this week, but it's actually from B&M.
Very cool.
I know, it's the best B&M bargain I've got to date. Thank you so much. Lockdown home renovations, like the rest of us.
Another question for Camryn, actually. You mentioned that there's a lot more short-term contracts happening. Do you think that's something that's going to stay, or is that just, at the moment, in terms of content, is that the way the employers are going to start working now that they get more people in doing content on a shorter basis?
Yeah, I think in lockdown, in comparison to our permanent team in Scotland and in the UK, the contract market has definitely been more busier, and that is with businesses making redundancies, and obviously employees are on furlough. So instead of bringing in another permanent member of staff to replace someone that might have been made redundant, they're bringing in a contractor instead, to sort of plug that gap until they've had a restructure potentially. So the contract market's definitely been busier until they sort of relook at their team or restructure how they're going to move forward in the next couple of years post-COVID. So at the moment, yes, but it could change.
Wilma's got another really important question. Are salaries dropping as a result of COVID?
I think
I don't know if Cathy, you might have an opinion on this as well. Just within marketing and comms, I've found businesses are asking for more and paying less. That's just certain clients I've spoken to. I can't speak for every business and every company, but there's been a time I've had to walk away from a few jobs just because I don't want to speak to candidates about. It was a 38k head of marketing managing 20 people, and I was like, that's a 70k job. So it's just making sure that you're not underselling yourself, and also clients still understand the value of candidates and don't ask for too much just because they feel there's a lot of candidates out there. So that it's just all about making sure that they're educated and that you're not underselling yourself just because there's not as many positions. So that's my advice.
I wonder how you avoid that though, because there just are a lot of people chasing the same jobs. That's really tricky.
I guess it depends what your approach is. If it's from, if you're applying directly to a job, then there's less negotiation that can take place. But if it's through a recruiter like myself, you can negotiate a bit better and also make them aware if they've been in more of a senior position or what the day rate's been, and then they'll be able to understand why it's come to that decision. Direct recruitment or roles that they've advertised themselves can be slightly different because they're not exposed to that knowledge. So it can be a bit different, depends on the approach that they've chosen to recruit.
I think it is tricky. I think people, there's changes, and people, as you said, it's about not underselling yourself. But if you are looking for work, it does make it tricky.
Yeah, there's been some contractors that, I always say to my candidates, I will never insult you, but if they are really keen for a contract in a new industry and it's 4 weeks and it's a 10k pay drop, I'll approach them about it, and if they say no, that's absolutely fine. Oh, there we go, sorry, I thought my laptop died. If they say no, that's absolutely fine, but it's just to make people aware of this is what the market's looking at, this is what the salaries are paying at the moment, but these are the conversations we're having that are positive. So I hope that people start feeling that the market will keep picking up.
Yeah. I mean, now
for their first job, do you think that they obviously perhaps won't have as much experience, but perhaps should they have a kind of hourly rate in mind, or is that something that you can help them with?
As in for a graduate?
Yeah.
Yeah, for graduates, I think the rough salary I've always sort of forecasted to clients for graduates has been anything between 19 and 25, and that's for an annual salary. So say if it's a contract role, you just break that down into an hourly rate. And there's been a couple of candidates I've placed about 22k, and their hourly rate of work at about £11–12 an hour, including holidays. That's just off the top of my head, so don't quote me on that as my math. But I would say for graduates, maybe not have as high expectations as 25k, just depends on the business. But I definitely look at that sort of arena of 18–19k as a minimum, and then obviously some businesses do pay up to 25k for apprenticeships or internships out there, because I'm actually helping my sister. She's looking to do an apprenticeship, and there's a few within the big four that are 23–24k apprenticeships within finance, but obviously different industry, but they are transferable skills for anybody looking to just do something short term.
And the links that you were talking about earlier for Hayes, are you able to share them with us either in the chat, or we can email them out to people?
Yeah, I can
afterwards?
send out the presentation and the links to anybody. I don't know if you've got a list of everyone on the call today, but I can send out the presentation and or all the links, because they are really useful if you've got a last minute interview and you don't really know how best to present yourself on video. There's easy tips on there that can support you on there.
Great. And the PRC itself has more general resources around COVID, and just I guess around mental health and well-being as well. So I can put them in the chat for everyone. And Healthy Working Lives has a really good toolkit about returning to work, which I will also share in the chat box now as well. And if anybody else has any suggestions for any good links that they've found, feel free to share those in the chat box too. So have we got any other questions, or is anybody wanting to have a chat more privately, or shall we wind up the event? I think we're coming to an end. Do you get anything, Hannah?
No, just that it was really insightful, and I think just say thank you so much once again to all of our speakers, and we'll definitely share the links with people that have joined today, and I'm sure you'll all know other people that the information will be relevant to, so please just push it out amongst your networks as much as possible.
Yeah, so thanks to everyone for coming along, especially thank you to our speakers, because I do think that was extremely helpful. Even if you're not in a situation at the moment, it's really good information to have even for the future. So that was, yeah, as Hannah said, really insightful.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for coming.
No problem.
So, yep, so we'll send out an email out to attendees with the links, and we can also send Camryn's presentation. So yeah, I think we'll just end there. Thanks everyone for coming.